Thank you all for logging in to another edition of BWJ Lunchtime Devotions. BWJ meaning being with Jesus. We have resumed our chronological study of the Gospels. And yesterday, Pastor led us to the point of the crucifixion, the 7 last words. And today, we will study still another section which has not reached the whole climax yet, that of the resurrection and the ascension. So we will be focusing on the taking away of the body to the tombs, and then what happened to the soldiers, what was required guarding of the body. So here we are going to read a couple of passages from different Gospels, and we will start off with Matthew 27, verse 57. Invariably, you will come to two choices of tombs. As with many of the historical sites, each time we will have possible areas of where the events took place, and there are two possibilities. That one is called the garden tomb, where the tombs are supposed to have been, and the other one is a site whereby there is now a church built over called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And if you look at the diagram, you can see that Golgotha is just outside the city limits at that time, but today the city, of course, has grown over, and what you see, Golgotha, the skull, you can actually make out the eyes and the nose. That's what Golgotha means, the place where the crucifixion took place. Very often in our minds, we think of on a hill far away stood an old rugged cross, but actually, it is right within the city today, because the city has grown around that site, and you can see tour buses and all right at the base of the Golgotha, the site of the crucifixion. Okay, so we will read starting from verse 57. Now Joseph, when evening came, evening means anytime between 3 to 6 p.m., there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, and who himself had also become a disciple of Jesus, a secret disciple, we know that. So Joseph went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate commanded the body to be given to him, to Joseph. When Joseph had taken the body, he wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, laid it in his new tomb, which he had hewn out of the rock, and he rolled a large stone against the door of the tomb and departed. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary sitting opposite the tomb, probably quite dejected, not knowing what to do. So we see here an apt title for today's study would be From a Virgin's Womb to a Virgin Tomb. It is very important also, later we'll find out why Joseph's tomb was unused. A virgin tomb, it has a special significance. And here you see how the Church of Holy Sepulchre looks like today. And then the other option, the garden tomb. Of course, the stone that rolled is not seen here. All right, we will talk about that. So the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, actually a few denominations are sharing parts of the property. You can imagine this would be prime property, and owners, co-owners are the Greek Orthodox Church, the Roman Catholic Church, the Armenian Apostolic Church, and to a lesser degree, the Coptic churches, the Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Syrian Orthodox, Ethiopian Orthodox Church. I believe they would be having services sharing at various times of the week. All right. So we read here, this man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus, Joseph of Arimathea. So, as was the custom, the bodies of the crucified criminals, they were left on the crosses, to rot or to be eaten by wild animals. But the Jews wanted no such horror during the Passover. Remember, this is the Passover season. And Romans were known to grant the corpses of the executed men to friends or relatives for a proper burial. And Joseph followed to the letter the burial customs of the day. The best he could, considering they had very little time because the Sabbath drew near. In Luke we read, so he was rushing against time. Laid it in his new tomb. The gospel writer tells us Jesus came into the world from a virgin's womb, and he came forth again from a virgin tomb. How apt, huh? Nobody had ever, there were no bodies in the tomb itself. So when a body came forth and the tomb was empty, there was no possible confusion which body actually came off, if there was ever, they thought at that time. So we read here, Spurgeon says it was a new tomb, wherein no remains had been previously laid, and thus, if he came forth, meaning Jesus came forth from it, there would be no suspicion that somebody else had arisen, nor could it be imagined that he rose through touching some old prophet's bones. Why did Spurgeon say that? No. In 2 Kings 13, we read the story of somebody who was thrown hurriedly into a tomb where Elisha's bones were. I will read very quickly. Only 2 verses are in 2 Kings verse 13, starting from verse 20. Elisha died and was buried. Now Moabite robbers used to enter the country every spring to torture, to raid and plunder the villages. And that's why, they were never the favorite arch enemies. So verse 21 tells us, while once there was a time when some Israelites were burying a man, suddenly they saw the band of raiders from Moab. So from Moab, the Moabite raiders. So they hurriedly threw the man's body into Elisha's tomb. When the body touched Elisha's bones, the man came to life and stood on his feet. This was the only time we read of this episode, and thereafter there was no explanation, no exposition, and nothing again mentioned. It is a one-off incident, a miracle that happened, and it was laid to rest at that. It was not that it was a custom that people try to find the prophets who are bones and let dead bodies touch and they would come to life, or they chose. But no, it was no such thing. But apparently, from the writings of the Old Testament, the Jews had this belief. So being placed in a virgin tomb was very important, so that there's no theory that, there was some other bones, maybe Elisha's bones or some other prophet's bones were there. Therefore, Jesus touched the bones, he became to life. No such thing. So that dispelled that theory. And then we continue. He rolled a stone against the door of the tomb. We don't know whether Joseph did this by himself or his good friend Nicodemus, or he was a rich man. He probably had a few servants with him. But this was the customary way to seal an expensive tomb. So a rich man like Joseph Arimathea, he probably bought that property long time ago, carved into the solid rock, and he was in a garden near the place of crucifixion. So prime real estate. The tomb would commonly have a small entrance, as you can see the picture, and one or more compartments where bodies were laid out and somewhat mummified with spices, ointments, and linen strips. So, as was the custom, the Jews left these bodies alone for a few years until they decayed down to the bones. Then the bones were put in a small stone known as an ossuary. And the ossuary remained in the tomb with the remains of other members. Okay, so that's why we say, no, when they threw the man into the tomb, he hit the bones. Is what's in the ossuary, huh? The door to the tomb was typically made out of heavy circular shaped stone, and there was a groove for it to run down into a channel, so it could not be moved easily except by several strong men. It was a gradient, so closing it was easier than to remove it to roll against the incline. This was done to ensure no one disturbed the remains. So then John 14 specifically tells us that the tomb of Joseph, that Joseph bought, was laid in a place close to the crucifixion. So here we see two possible sites where the present Church of Holy Sepulchre is, and or the garden tomb. Joseph probably didn't like it that the value of his family, not just for him, his family tomb, the real estate value would decrease because the Romans decided to crucify people nearby. When he bought that, there was no crucifixion at Golgotha yet. But later on, the Romans decided, yeah, this is a good spot. And of course, the real estate of Joseph's tomb went down. But importantly, remember this, it reminds us that in God's plan, the cross and the power of the resurrection are always permanently and closely connected. Tombs like this were very expensive, understandably. It was quite a sacrifice for Joseph to give this up. But little did he know it was only for the weekend. In hindsight, we know, don't worry, Joe, it's only for the weekend. And then verse 62 to 66, we read, on the next day, which followed the day of preparation, the chief priests, the Pharisees gathered together to Pilate, saying, still never give up. No, those fellows, sir, we remember while he was alive, how the deceiver, they called Jesus deceiver, said, after 3 days I will rise. So please, therefore command that the tomb be made secure until the third day, lest his disciples come at night and steal him away and say to the people, oh, he has risen from the dead. So the last deception will be worse than the first one. Pilate said to them, you have a guard, go your way, make it as secure as you know how. So they went away and made the tomb secure, sealing the stone and setting the guard. Here we see what would probably look like the stone steel with a glob of wax and Roman. There were 6 actually Roman guards. So here we go back to that passage. The Pharisees and the chief priests, they gave Pilate a title of honor and respect, calling him sir. But the day before this, the same religious leaders, these same people, what did they call Jesus? They mocked him, they scorned him, they rejected him, the King of Kings. They mocked, they despised him. But yet, this same group of chief priests and Pharisees, they honored Pilate. What an irony. So on the next day, it must mean, therefore, that the chief priests and Pharisees, they actually approached Pilate on the Sabbath. Okay, Pastor has explained the Sabbath, whether it's 3 days or 4 days, doesn't matter. And if they did that, it was clear to see how radically they actually broke the Sabbath law. No work to be done, but yet they went to Pilate on the Sabbath. And then they said, we remember, how he, the deceiver, said the 3 days, they remembered, Ironically, the enemies of Jesus remembered his promise of resurrection better than his own disciples remembered while he was still alive. In this, the enemies admit, Jesus is dead. There's a theory called the swoon theory, that Jesus actually fainted only, and then a conjecture that don't believe in the resurrection. They said he never really died. He just swooned, fainted on the cross, passed out, and then wonderfully revived. There was a Christian newsletter, and they have this section called letters to their editor, and the editor's name was Eutychus. Okay, and this person wrote a letter to ask about this swoon, this fainting theory. So the person wrote, "Dear Eutychus, our preacher said on Easter, Jesus just swooned on the cross and the disciples nursed him back to health. What do you think?" Sincerely bewildered, he signed bewildered. So Eutychus replied, "Dear bewildered, beat your preacher with a cat of nine tails with a whip, 39 heavy strokes. Then nail him to the cross. Then hang him in the sun for 6 hours. Then run a spear through his heart, embalm him, put him in the airless tomb for 36 hours and see what happens. Sincerely, Eutychus." So in a very humorous but logical way, the editor was telling the man, no way the swoon theory can take place. Impossible that Jesus just fainted and was revived. And then it continues, lest his disciples come at night and steal him away. They couldn't have been afraid of the disciples. The disciples were terrified and hiding. They knew they were gone from the scene already. And their intelligence told them the disciples were actually terrified. So what were they afraid of? Instead, they were afraid of the power of Jesus. And look at their words. They said, "And say to the people, he has risen from the dead." So if that were to happen, why not just say to the disciples, "So where is your Jesus? Produce the supposedly living body of your risen Lord." They knew it would do nothing for the disciples to steal the body because they could not present a dead body and pretend it was alive. That would prove nothing. What they were really afraid of was the resurrection power of Jesus. So it is said that the religious leaders were afraid of the resurrection power of Jesus. We are coming to this, resurrection power of Jesus. But at least they believed it was true. On Saturday morning, the chief priests, the Pharisees, on that Saturday morning, these people, the chief priests, they preached a better resurrection sermon than the disciples did at that point in time. So they told Pilate, make a guard, have a guard, make it secure. So both the Jewish leaders and the Romans, they were well aware the need to guard the tomb, and they took all necessary measures to secure it. These measures simply gave great testimony to the miracle of the resurrection. If the tomb was unguarded, one might suggest that an unknown person or person stole the body and it would be difficult to refute. Yet, the tomb was so well guarded, we can be certain his body wasn't stolen. So, Pilate gave a promise to supply guards. And here we see that we read from historians, there were 6, okay? And he said, sealing the stone and setting the guard, which we see here in the picture. The measures, great measures were taken to secure the tomb of Jesus. The tomb was secured by a stone. And the stone, we will call it a material obstacle. Something of material, not spiritual, not made from air. It is a material obstacle. These stones were large, set on an inclined channel, like we say, a real obstacle. The stone cannot be rolled away from the inside, that's for sure. And certainly not quietly. But they have to work together, a group, to roll it away. That didn't seem likely. And then it was secured by a seal, or probably Pilate's seal. And overlapping the width of the stone was this seal covering 2 sides with the rope, as we can see. And the guards, they witnessed that sealing. They were responsible for what was being inside, what was being sealed. Their careers were at stake. Their lives was at stake. So this was secured by the authority of the Roman Empire. And so what we means, it was human authority. Here we see that the seal, the globe of wax, represented human authority. And again, that prevented any tricks that they thought the disciples were going to do. And finally, the guards were there. And here we see human strength. There were actually 6 guards. And each guard, one guard had 4 soldiers. So they had shields, they had daggers, they had armor. These were Roman soldiers. They couldn't be bothered about Jewish law, about rituals, about Jesus. They were called to secure the tomb of a criminal, and that's it. They were cold-blooded enough to gamble over a dying man's clothes. Remember? They were not the kind of men to be tricked by disciples or others. So none of these obstacles matter. They all fall away before Jesus. The material obstacles don't stand before the resurrected Jesus. Human authority didn't stand against the resurrected Jesus. And human strength certainly didn't stand before the resurrected Jesus. So what is it that is preventing you from pointing to the resurrected Lord? Each of us might have different obstacles preventing us each time to point towards the resurrected Lord. Okay, so now we read in Mark 15. When the evening came, it was preparation day. Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent council member, took courage, went in to ask from Pilate the body. And it goes on, almost a similar narration. He bought fine linen, laid him in the tomb, which he had hewn out of the rock, and rolled a stone. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, which is our brother of James the Lesser. So we will learn later in the week there were actually 3 Marys, plus Joanna and a few ladies at the tomb. So we read, Joseph of Arimathea was a prominent council member. Though in the early part of the story he was silent, he shrunk back, but he was not ashamed to identify. So Joseph did not serve Jesus in many ways, but did serve him when no one else did, when no one else could. Peter, James, John, the many women who served Jesus, none of them could provide a tomb. But Joseph could, Joseph did. He probably thought, God provided this tomb for me, and I will give it back to him. Point to note, what special thing has God given you so you can give it to Jesus? So here we read not just about Joseph, we will read later about, very quickly, about Nicodemus. Pilate marveled that Jesus was already dead. Typically, the crucifixion is a long and agonizing death, but Jesus died in a matter of hours. We know that. John 19, we read, no, this was careful examination by many eyewitnesses, people who have seen death by crucifixion, the Roman soldiers, the centurions. And as we said, these tombs were expensive, but for Joseph, even though he didn't know that it was for a few days only, it was a sacrifice for him. So we are now going to read a bit about Nicodemus. Earlier we read John chapter 3, I think, about Nicodemus coming under cover of darkness and asking, what must I do to be born again? So Nicodemus came, John 19 verse 39, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, probably our aloe vera type of herbs. And the whole thing about 100 pounds by weight. Myrrh at the beginning, you remember the Magi, the wise men, and then now at the ending, but not so really the ending. They bound it with linen wrappings and spices and put him in the new tomb. Okay, so we met Jesus, Nicodemus earlier on in John already, and he, like Joseph of Arimathea, was a Pharisee and ruler of the Jews. Remember, he came at night and asked the important question. And now we see him again. And while Joseph provided the linen cloth and the tomb, Nicodemus, on the other hand, gathered up all the necessary spices, not a small amount, 100 pounds of it, and it would be wound on the body, limb by limb, with the spices strewn in. This was the Jewish burial custom. No embalming as what we know with the pharaohs and the Egyptians. This was the Jewish custom. Well, anyway, the Sabbath would start at 6 p.m. So what did we know? What can we learn about these two men, Nick and Joe, Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea? We know for sure both of them were men of influence and men of affluence. They had substantial wealth. They had influence. Very often, we in the church and others, we do not look too kindly or have good opinions of people with influence and affluence. Very often we say, so rich lah, they will not find God relevant. But here was something against the grain. Two secret believers, no more secret now, but they had influence, they had affluence, and they put it to use when it was time for them to rise up. Three things we can learn. Don't follow the crowd. It would have been easy for them. Joseph of Arimathea had a faith in Jesus and was considered a disciple. Despite him being a member of the Sanhedrin, but he held his belief. He had a faith in Jesus despite circumstances and surroundings. He was a risk taker, especially when he went to Pilate, who would not have known what Pilate would do or say. We didn't know how vocal Joseph was. The second point is, don't follow the crowd, follow Jesus. But we do know that he risked everything in asking Pilate for the body. Finally, timing. Trust in his timing. Joseph probably had no idea the days or weeks ahead before the crucifixion that he would be the chosen one, together with Nicodemus, to honor Jesus by burying him according to customs. They did not break any custom. Yet, when the time came, he stepped out in faith. While sadly at that point in time, all the disciples were scattered, Joseph and Nicodemus, men of influence, men of affluence, they were in the right position, they were at the right place, and they acted at the right time. May we too look for such opportunities and circumstances with what God has blessed us, whether it is influence and or affluence, to rise up to the occasion, not follow the crowd, and be of use to the master. Amen.